The Constitution-class cruiser, one of the most important vessels to serve in Starfleet during the 23rd century, entering service in numbers during the 2250s and forming the core of the fleet's exploratory and military arms in the middle of the 23rd century, the class represented a major leap forward in the fleet's capability. Starfleet would stick with the Constitution class throughout the 2270s and beyond, updating the ships in a massive refit program which saw virtually every detail of the vessels modernized and updated, with new sensors, nacelles, weapons, and updated capabilities, which kept the design relevant. By the time that work was done, it could be said, in fact, that the refit created an entirely new ship. But realistically, what did the refit do? How did it improve on the abilities of the original Constitution? And what did it mean in terms of increasing the capability of Starfleet as these ships came online? Aside from the two ships looking quite different, all of the basic parts are in the same place, but they're all radically different dimensionally and size-wise from one version to another. But what exactly changes between the original Connie and the refit? Let's just go over some of the more big item changes and how that impacted the refit. Between the two Constitution-class designs, the most significant change in terms of effects to the ship would be the more powerful reactor fitted to the refit. This new reactor provided the Constitution with higher speeds, more powerful weapons, and greater shield strength than it had prior to the refit. The new reactor and the effects it has on the design would be the cornerstone of why the refit happened the way it did. With the new reactor being larger and more powerful, it needed more room in the secondary hull of the ship, which meant the secondary hull needed to be bigger and thus redesigned to accommodate it. The more powerful reactor of the refit would permit much higher speeds which placed much more stress on the ship's nacelles than had originally been intended, requiring that a new design receive new and improved nacelles capable of withstanding the stress. These newer nacelles were only made necessary by the new reactor and desire for greater speed. Due to the greater stresses and the redesigned secondary hull, the new nacelles would connect to the ship with a different supporting strut design as well. The last significant change to the refit versus the original, which is located in the redesigned secondary hull, the refit would change the ship's deflector dish, moving to one that was intended for higher fidelity sensors, longer subspace communications range, and, well, obviously, better deflector performance. The new deflector would abandon the pure metallic design of earlier versions of the Constitution in favor of a more modern energy projection and field resonance chamber design that would become standard aboard Federation starships moving forward. Working our way up the ship, we come to the significantly redesigned neck, which has been lengthened, streamlined, and had several features added or moved here, namely a pair of airlocks for docking and a large pod forward which features the ship's photon torpedo launchers as well as their attached magazines. The changes to the neck were made necessary again due to the higher speeds the refit was intended to travel at, and the higher stresses involved. This will be the last significant change to the design, which was made based upon the speed of the ship and the subsequent increase in stress that all hull components had to endure. Compared to the original design, the refit has a significantly larger saucer section with much greater internal volume. The new saucer was made necessary due to the intended larger crew space and beefed up armament of the ship versus the original design, which had been prepared in the 2240s. The refit added significantly to the firepower of the Constitution, seeing the addition of more powerful phasers, in addition to the redesigned torpedo launchers. Perhaps the most notable feature of the ship's upgraded armament would be the change to the ship's phasers drawing power directly from the reactor, permitting their vast increase in power. The new phasers correspondingly with the new power they put out were much larger and took up more space, again feeding back into the size of the saucer section being increased. Now that we've gone over the changes to the ship from its original design to the refit, we come to the key question of the video. Why? Was all of this work actually necessary, and what did the added capability get you as Starfleet in the period? Well, I think that the reasoning behind the refit boils down to essentially two issues which were resolved. The first is the potential lack of resources made available to Starfleet for the construction of new vessels to keep pace with the Klingons. And the second is the rapid pace of technological development in the period, which had rendered a lot of the fleet obsolete after decades of improvement in newer classes. On the surface, the first issue is perhaps quite confusing. We know with a fair degree of certainty that the Federation was in a major arms race with the Klingon Empire during the 2260s and 70s, with both sides building a lot of vessels. Within this framework, you might think that it would be natural that Starfleet would have the budget to build whatever it needed in order to keep pace with Klingon production. And while this may have been true, it could have also been the case that the Federation's government was unwilling to fund further heavy cruisers in the period, preferring to instead focus Starfleet's attention on defensively oriented vessels and installations. In this scenario, Starfleet could have performed the refit as a means of skirting around these restrictions, producing essentially a whole new ship off the bones of the old, under the guise of simply performing a refit to the existing fleet. Something like this is not a novel concept. My favorite example of this from the real world would be the Austro-Hungarian warship Kaiser, which began life as a wooden ship of the line, similar to the still surviving HMS Victory in Portsmouth, but with steam and like a century newer. Eventually, she was completely rebuilt into a casemate ironclad, with little of the original ship remaining once the work was completed. Like Starfleet, the Austro-Hungarian government was unwilling to fund new warship construction for the Navy, but did release funds for refits of existing ships, and similarly to what Starfleet may have done centuries later, the Navy took the funding and then stretched the definition of refit to its max to get basically a brand new ship once everything was said and done. This brings up a good second possible reason for the refit: the rapid pace of technological development. Constitution and her sisters began entering service in numbers during the 2250s, meaning there was almost 2 decades separating the original design of the vessels from their refit in the 2270s. 20 years is a long time. It might not seem that long if you can divide your age by 20, but as far as technology is concerned, 20 years is forever. Try using a cell phone or computer from 20 years ago in the modern world. That Nokia might be indestructible, but you really can't play Rocket League on it. Well, is Rocket League on Android? Uh-oh. I may have picked a bad example. Anyway, likewise, after 2 decades in deep space representing the Federation, the Connies may have found themselves lagging behind the curve technologically, with newer ships which had entered service since then leaping ahead of them when it came to speed, firepower, computational capability, greater range, and superior reliability. Within this context, Starfleet may have decided that it made sense to massively refit the Constitution-class ships, the ones that had survived, to a more modern standard to remain competitive and viable. And these two possibilities are not mutually exclusive either. You could have seen multiple causes behind the decision to refit the Constitution-class ships, both those outlined here as well as several other, more minor factors. So, why do you think that the Constitution was refit, and do you think that it achieved its goal? Let me know with a comment. Also, feel free to like the video. If you did like the video. If you didn't like the video, then I guess disliking it also counts as engagement, which is all that matters to YouTube. So click that too if you did dislike the video, I guess. Also, you can subscribe to the channel if you did like the video. Now, that's something that if you didn't like the video, you probably shouldn't do, unlike hitting the dislike button, because it benefits nobody. You hitting the dislike button is cathartic for you, I imagine, and benefits me and YouTube's algorithm. But, I mean, you subscribing to a channel you don't like doesn't accomplish anything now, does it? Also, big thanks to the channel's patrons, which there is a link to the channel's Patreon below. If you like the artwork that I make in the videos, then feel free to head over there. All the artwork that I make for the videos is on Patreon and is free, so that won't cost you anything to get it. You can just go over there and nick it, and then it's yours. I mean, it's also mine, but, you know, it's yours then if you have the JPEG. I mean, because the internet is forever, and it's very easy to get things. So yeah, feel free to do that. If you do really like the channel, then you can join the Patreon, and you get, like, videos in advance and sneak peeks on what's going on. But, you know, again, don't do that unless you really want to. I mean, or just do it. I mean, I don't get to tell you what to do, and I don't get to tell you what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. Buy a lottery ticket.